Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a very, hopefully short review of some information that comes out of a discussion in the post to my 30 core assessment. Want to thank the folks that have contributed comments. It's been useful. Going to find out I need to make a correction to one of the things I said in my video. And let's go ahead and get to it. For those of you who have seen my video, this is a discussion of basically 30 Core's performance on the road to Arnhem. And, you know, of course, part of that discussion has to come around the performance of the 82nd Airborne at Nijmegen. And for the most part, the thesis of my first video here was that 30 Core's performance has been pretty well maligned, but up until probably about the time of the amphibious crossing, I think arguably 30 Core's performance actually can be shown to be reasonably good. Could it have been better? Sure. But without getting into all the gory details, you can watch the other video for that if you want to see it. They were sitting there, ready to seize the bridge. When they arrived at Nijmegen, 30 Corps was expecting the bridge to be in American hands. And in theory, this should have been a relatively quick transition of Nijmegen across the bridge and then on to Arnhem. And so, without getting bogged down too much in that, the thing that I wanted to talk about is two things. The first one being I make a reference in my video to the crossing or the seizing of the railroad bridge, and I think there's a mistake in part of what I said, although we didn't focus a lot of time in the video on the railroad bridge. And then the second thing gets into the view that trying to decide about whether the decision to deprioritize the bridge was a real-time decision or whether that was a sort of a made-up story after the war to cover subordinates' failures. Was Gavin being the gentleman and taking the rap, that sort of thing. So let's take a look at that here. And I'll put the links to this video down below in case you're interested in the whole thing. So one of the better dialogues that I've had in this thread was with Dave Mac 1197. He put some nice comments about the analysis, and he talks about the not being aware of the tanks right here crossing the Nijmegen rail bridge. There's a brief segment when we talk in the main video when I talk about the amphibious assault, and that once the Americans got over, about half of them survived. Major Cook's folks seized the north end of the rail bridge and cleared it. And I'll be honest, I then reference the fact that there are 4 tanks that allegedly crossed the bridge and kind of ride off into history. No one ever talks about them again. And then we proceed on to the discussion about the road bridge and the 4 tanks that everyone does know about, those that were under Sergeant Robinson, the ones that actually crossed over in the movie A Bridge Too Far, and then pulled up short and stopped on the north end of the bridge and did not advance. And so those are the ones that are famous. And there were these 4 tanks that had supposedly assisted in the rail, according to my video. And I'll be honest, I don't think that, I think I misread or juxtaposed some information in Anthony Beaver's book. The way the paragraph read is, I think I merged the commentary from the rail bridge with the follow-on discussion, and I don't think those 4 ever existed. If anyone knows any different, let me know. The second thing that from his conversation that was noteworthy. And this one just gets down. Whereas the first one here, I think is just, I think I misunderstood what Beaver had written, and I said in the video, it's like I couldn't find any corroboration for those 4 tanks. So I was kind of interested. Does anybody have any information? Because nobody talks about four tanks crossing the rail bridge. Okay, so with enough throwing myself under the bus for that mistake, it represents about 1 minute of discussion out of an hour long video. I'm going to move on to the rest of this. He talks here about the Shermans and how they were organized and that sort of thing, and how Robinson's operation went on, and then he puts in a bullet here. Your discussion about the bridges being deprioritized is the conventional narrative established by Ryan and a bridge too far, and it's now clear from recent research that Gavin did this post-war to avoid throwing a subordinate under the bus. And he references a couple of books there. Certainly, Dave Mack here is entitled to his opinion. But what I replied to him was that, first of all, I believe you're correct about the bridges. I can't find any corroborating evidence, and I think I went back and read it thoroughly, and I think I just attached some commentary from the rail bridge to the next paragraph when they start to discuss the 4 tanks, and I think that just was a mistake on my part. But I point out that I'm not so sure that I agree on point number 3 about the deprioritization, and so I replied to give some sense of why I feel this way. I was like, when you read the actual order, the bridges are deprioritized, and regardless, their actions, the actions of the 82nd, in particular the 508th, were consistent with the fact that they were deprioritized. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about whether Gavin throws them Lundquist under the bus or not, Lindquist under the bus or not. I think that he did. I think that the decision to deprioritize was made beforehand, and then Gavin later tries to somewhat exonerate himself by saying, well, hey, I told Lindquist, to do whatever, and we'll take a look at that and just see. So, in response, Dave came back and he basically, I want to read the bottom line here first. So this is why I am where I am after reading these books. He comes to the impression that basically, Gavin's, that Lindquist was the real cause of the delays, and that the failures were Lindquist, and that Gavin was being noble and doing the honorable thing by saying, hey, I deprioritized it after the fact, and tried to make Lindquist look less culpable. Okay. And then, he points in his narrative. This is not Dave Mack's words. He's quoting a series of different, books here. Where it talks about Lindquist's or Warren's battalion, which was one of Lindquist's subordinates commands. Gets there about 5 hours after the landing. Okay. Later down here, he talks about the fact that Gavin, got word that 508th was slow. Right here on arriving at the 508th Regiment, Gavin told Lindquist, I told you to move with speed. And at 8 p.m., Lindquist ordered Warren to attack. And then there's this little bit here. This was the first time the battalion was told it was to secure the bridge. Now, this is Warren, yet one layer deeper, the subordinate of Lindquist, and his troopers here are saying that that's the first they heard of it, that they were supposed to secure the bridge. It's like, okay, so let's start off with, I was an operations officer for a very big chunk of my career. I got stuck in operations as a planner at the company level, at the battalion level, at the brigade level, and division level. And we're going to talk about a couple of things that are very common to orders production and how you brief, how you rehearse, etc. Even though things are different today than they were in World War II, they still had written operations orders. They still did verbal brief backs. They still did rehearsals. Now, I don't have great details on how much rehearsal they did for this particular operation, but they would have done at least a leader's rock drill of some sort. And so let's kind of read this sentence closely. This was the first time the battalion was told it was to secure the bridge. Okay, the Warren's battalion is the battalion that advanced from the 508th drop zone toward Nijmegen, toward the bridges. Okay, so it was, think of this, it was the lead element out of the 508th in its advance toward the bridge. And this was the first time it was ever told that it was to secure the bridge. Now, this might have been the first time that they've got, orders to start the attack. But from the get-go, it was Warren's battalion that was tasked to go do that. So this isn't the first time they're being told to secure the bridge. It might just be the first time they had heard at 8 p.m. might have been the first time that the commander said, okay, start the attack now. Okay, so we got to be, as you read these narratives, you can come away with this feeling that, well, the battalion was slow, or that the 508th was slow, and that maybe Warren and Lundquist were, slow, blah, blah, blah. And maybe they were. I don't know. I've been to a combat zone, and believe it or not, the cream does not always rise to the top. The fact that this is one of the premier divisions in the American Army does not mean that Lundquist and Warren were necessarily the best. But by this time of the war, most of the chaff had been washed away. So I'm not going to pass judgment too much on Lundquist and Warren, except to see how their story jives with what the orders report. Because what Gavin says after the fact doesn't mean a thing to me. When people lose battles, there's an awful lot of CYA that goes on. So now let's take a look at what was actually written and how we know that the bridge was deprioritized. So this is an order from the 13th of September. Remember, they dropped in, on the 17th, I think? So this was the written order that was put out just a few days beforehand. Okay? This would have occurred after the first initial, when they first decided they were going to do this, and the division staff would go back and kind of look at their objective, and they would come back and say, hey, sir, here's the things we got to do, and then they would start working with the airborne, the Corps. As a division, they would be working with the Corps, and they would be preparing their operations orders in parallel with the Corps order. And they would have been, this is where, from real world experience, this is where the battalion coordinates their order and puts their feedback up to brigade, and brigade puts their feedback up to division, etc. Orders production is a cooperative effort, and subordinate units do in fact influence the missions that get to assigned to them. Not always, but as a general rule, they do. So, the situations where you don't get to influence the orders is when in the Battle of the Bulge, right? There's a crisis and command decisions have to be made, and it's sit down, shut up, and do this. Okay? And then guess what? The subordinate unit does what it's told. But when you're preparing missions, you always have input as a subordinate into the creation, the order that comes out of your hire. You always have some type of input. So on the 13th, the 82nd publishes this order, and I want to emphasize something really to make the point of why I don't necessarily agree with Mac on the situation of this being a narrative that formed after the war that got created by Cornelius Ryan, and that Gavin did it for, noble purposes. The order is very clear. Look at the 504th mission at Grav. Without delay, seize and hold the bridge, right? In military jargon, there are phrases that mean something. Without delay is exactly what it means. This is your number one priority, okay? Then it says, seize and hold crossings over the canals, okay? Remember, those extra bridges sort of in between Grav and Nijmegen, they were supposed to get those too, but it is definitely a lower priority. It's obviously land on the DZ is your first priority. You have to land and do immediate DZ security, but the first priority without delay is to get the major bridge at Grav. And then you got C, D, E, and F as your secondary stuff. Mark this, mop up, establish, blah, blah, blah. There is no question when you read this as a battalion commander, as a regimental commander, what your primary objective is. Now let's look at the 508th. Remember, this is before the war. This is before the need to cover your ass. This is before Gavin. This is Gavin's order, right? And this is before he needs to justify his failure. Okay? Seize and organize and hold the key terrain features around the area of responsibility. Substitute Groesbeek Heights. The whole rationale for deprioritizing the bridges in the first place was to favor securing the Groesbeek Heights. I think this is a complete bogus red herring mission, but that's what it was. They, for whatever reason, Gavin and his staff evaluated the Groesbeek Heights to be so important that it was the first activity after physically landing on the ground, bullet A. The first thing was not go get the bridge. It wasn't without delay seize the Nijmegen bridge. It was after you secure the key terrain, Groesbeek Heights. Notice here underlined, be prepared. Okay, in military jargon, there are precedents. There's on order, there's be prepared, there's without delay. Okay, be prepared and on order are generally subordinate priorities, and they are not. What's the word? They do require follow-on guidance to execute them. They are not, this is not, when it says be prepared, this doesn't mean secure the heights and then go do this. It says be prepared. And I want to say I've got some other documentation where it talks about, that Gavin was supposed to, once he was happy with the situation at Groesbeek, that he was then going to give the order. I can't find that document immediately. I don't really need to muddy up the water on that. I don't want to do a 4 tanks on the railroad bridge scenario here. This document is the op order, and it's very, very clear. Lindquist's order was to be prepared to seize that, and what that means is upon receipt of I missed the underline this point, on order of the division commander. So it's just confirming for what I've been telling you from real world experience. What I'm telling you is be prepared is not an execute immediate mission. It's not something that you do of your own accord. So when you say that bullet 2, when you look at bullet 2, you have to understand there are two. There's a B1 and a B2, and B2 is only executed when the division commander says so. Okay, so the notion that somehow the bridge was that the Nijmegen bridge was the number one priority, and that after the war Gavin somehow deprioritized it so as to cover Lindquist's failure to perform, it is not held up by the actual documents that were used to drive the planning, briefing, and rehearsing phases of the operation. And it's not consistent with what Lindquist reported. Of course, he's going to probably want to say that, hey, I don't remember being told to take the bridge immediately. Well, he wasn't told that. So let's talk a little bit about CYA versus actual, right? And the old thing about Occam's razor, okay, after the war, Gavin has been quoted as claiming responsibility for deprioritizing the bridges. So some people are suggesting that he did this to be noble, right? And Browning, but what we care about is the fact that he claims that he was the source for deprioritizing the bridges. This, I believe, is true because Browning concurs that Gavin basically asked him to deprioritize it in favor of the heights, and he concurred with the assessment, which I think was wrong, but it doesn't matter what I think. So Browning is basically corroborating Gavin's claim that Gavin was responsible. Browning approved it, and therefore he takes on some of the responsibility. As the higher headquarters, he allowed a subordinate to, change the priorities. It's all about the bridges. Remember, Browning, it's all about the bridges. But, except in the case of Nijmegen, let's deprioritize it in favor of the Groesbeek Heights. So Browning incurs responsibility. I think it's shared between Gavin and Browning for that decision, but there is no doubt that the operation placed the mission to seize at a lower priority on a be prepared status that was to be triggered on order of the commander. Okay, so if we start looking at, was Gavin covering for his subordinates? Well, the claim that when he claims responsibility for the deprioritization, that has the effect of covering his subordinates, right? It wasn't Lindquist's fault. I just the one who deprioritized it. He was just doing what he told. But in other post-war, interviews and testimony, so to speak, he also claimed that he ordered Lindquist to, quote, seize the bridge immediately, quote, on the airfield in England. Okay, now let's think about that. You've spent 7 days preparing the orders, preparing the men, briefing the staffs, briefing the subordinate commands, doing your rehearsals on the basis of the order that said seize the Groesbeek Heights and be prepared on order to go and get the bridge. And now you're standing on the airfield getting ready to climb into the plane, and you tell one guy, you tell this commander of the 508th, hey, go seize the bridge immediately. All that stuff that we said about focusing on Groesbeek, no. Go seize the bridge immediately, right? That is testimony that is designed to throw Lindquist under the bus. Period. He's looking for someone to blame. And he's like, okay, well, it's my decision to deprioritize, but I overrode my decision to deprioritize and told him on the day of the lift on the airfield to go and do this immediately. And therefore, really it's kind of Lindquist's fault, not my fault. Okay? Now, I don't care whether he said this or not. Maybe he did tell Lindquist. But put yourself in this position as a leader. You're telling one guy who's on a plane that might get shot down. Okay, so you're going to go off into battle, and you're going to be fighting the battle, you being Gavin, you're going to be fighting the battle on Groesbeek Heights, assuming that one guy lived so that when he got on the drop zone at the 508 drop zone so that he could get his staff together and he could tell them, hey guys, remember all that stuff that we briefed, right? And where we said we're going to secure the Groesbeek Heights over here to the east and south of our location? No. Remember the be prepared order that said go north? We're going to do that one right away, and we're going to turn our back to the supposed enemy on the Groesbeek Heights, and we're going to go to the be prepared mission right away because that's what the commander told me back in England. Okay? What if that airplane got shot down? The 508th would have been proceeding along the lines of the order that it was briefed and rehearsed and told to expect. It would have first focused its efforts on the Groesbeek Heights. If Lindquist had been killed for whatever reason, the one person who knew that Gavin had changed his mind, the 508th would have done exactly what it did, which is follow the order, which was secure Groesbeek in its local, its drop zone and local areas, and then it would have projected toward the bridge. So, I very much enjoyed the conversation, or the interaction with this particular thread, and it does show somebody who's actually read quite a bit and has some good information about how things were actually happened on the day. And we're not in dispute on that, right? We don't disagree on that. We don't. I think we both see that the whole handling of the seizing of Nijmegen was unfortunately not particularly good. But if we do disagree on what I'm going to call the revisionist history of just because Cornelius Ryling, quote, established the narrative and that narrative has been overturned, well, some of the narratives of Orion should be overturned, in my opinion. For example, on another video, I've talked about the decision of Major Gao when they dropped the Jeep squadron in Arnhem. That was just a badly portrayed in the movie and the book, and as a consequence, it gives the impression that the reason the British recon squadron, Jeep recon squadron, didn't get to the bridge was because they were all destroyed. And it's like that's not an accurate representation, and it lets the British off the hook. In this case, the British lets them off the hook. The failure to seize the bridge here at Nijmegen is an American thing, and there are numerous examples where for example, the movie gives you the impression that the Americans seized the north end of the road bridge and that they were relieved by Robinson's tanks. Well, that's completely bogus. They have merged the rail bridge assault with the road bridge assault into one assault, and it gives a false impression of what actually happened and who did the work. The actual seizing of the road bridge was done 100% by the British, by Robinson. So when we start talking about narratives, there are narratives that form up early on that new facts come along to contradict. But I don't think that these authors here, just because they're talking about down at the level of confusion, if you will, that doesn't mean that they invalidate the reality of what was going on. And the reality of what was going on was, and had a little video clip there. The reality of what was expected of these two commands, the one that took the Grave Bridge versus the 82nd Airborne, or the 508th, which was supposed to take the Nijmegen Bridge, they had completely different sets of mission parameters. And Gavin, those people who say that Gavin was that the Ryan narrative was laid down and it's wrong, and that really Gavin was just doing this to protect the reputations of the subordinates, I don't think that's held up either by the pre-execution orders or the post-execution realities of it. Lindquist has basically said that no, that wasn't my order, and Lindquist is consistent with what is written before the failure, not after the failure. So I think that it's fair to say, could Lindquist and Warren have done a better job? Well, first of all, they just flat out, if the 508th had committed its full resources to the assault earlier in the day, I do think they would have seized that bridge, because it was the arrival of Grabner's forces that basically put the final nail in the coffin of trying to seize the bridge on day one, at least in my estimation. Lindquist may or may not have been any good. This is not about whether he was good or bad. This is not about whether Warren was good or bad, or even whether their actions were efficient or effective on that day. Were their actions consistent with what they were told to do? And the answer, I believe, that is yes, they were. They did what they were told to do, and Gavin just doesn't ring true to me. And that comes from reading the documents, reading the testimony, personal experience as an operations guy, operations officer, and Occam's razor. When everything fits the truth, and one thing basically steps out of that, right? The one thing that is not consistent with everything else is the business where Gavin says, I told him to do it immediately. As if that verbal command overrode everything they'd done all that week. That's the one bullet that Lindquist says he never got that is out of alignment with the other facts. And that one conveniently covers Gavin's backside and throws Lindquist under the bus. So, hope this was useful. And again, I'm sorry for the confusion on the 4 tanks on the rail bridge. I'm about 99.9% sure that was just a mistake on my part. And, put your comments in below. I'd love to hear what you have to say.